This is lesson 2 of 6 on the Cold War. The Cold War heats up. The vocab: Chiang Kai shek, Mao Zedong, Taiwan, 38th parallel, and the Korean War. For 2 decades, the Chinese Communists struggled against the nationalist government led by Chiang Kai shek. The U.S. supported Chiang and sent him aid because he opposed communism. But U.S. officials knew that Chiang's government was inefficient and corrupt. He overtaxed the Chinese people even during times of famine. Mao Zedong led the communist forces in the north. He won the support of many Chinese peasants. His forces encouraged peasants to learn to read and help them improve food production. By 1945, much of northern China was communist. President Truman refused to send American troops to help the nationalists fight communism, but he did send $2 million worth of military equipment and supplies. Even so, in 1949, Chiang and his forces had to flee to Taiwan, an island off the coast of China. The communists ruled all of the mainland China and set up the People's Republic of China, which the US refused to accept as China's true government. Americans were stunned that China had become communist. American conservatives said that the US had lost China because there was not enough help for the nationalists. Containment had not worked in Asia. Truman's supporters said that the communists' success was because Chiang could not win the support of the Chinese people. Conservatives claimed that the US government was filled with communist agents. American fear of communism began to burn out of control. Japan had ruled Korea since 1910. At the end of World War II, Japanese forces in the north surrendered to the Soviets. In the south, the Japanese surrendered to the Americans. Two nations then developed. They were separated by the 38th parallel, an imaginary line that divides Korea at the 38th degree north latitude. In 1948, South Korea became an independent nation. North Korea became a communist nation. In June of 1950, North Korea started the Korean War by invading South Korea. Its efforts were supported by the Soviet Union. Truman was afraid another Asian nation was about to fall to communism. He ordered air and naval support for South Korea. Then the UN agreed to help South Korea. Troops from 16 nations, most of them American, were sent to South Korea. They were led by General Douglas MacArthur. North Korean troops moved steadily south. They conquered the capital of South Korea, Seoul. Then MacArthur launched a counterattack. His forces trapped about half the North Korean army, which surrendered. MacArthur's success in Korea made him a national hero. United Nations and South Korean forces advanced toward the 38th parallel. If they crossed it, the war would become an offensive rather than a defensive one. In October 1950, the UN told MacArthur to cross the 38th parallel and reunite Korea. The Chinese opposed UN forces moving into North Korea. China said it would not let the Americans near its border, and China joined the war on the side of North Korea. Chinese troops drove UN forces southward. In January of 1951, the Communists recaptured Seoul. For 2 years, fighting continued. MacArthur wanted to extend the war into China. He even suggested using nuclear weapons. Truman was against this strategy. The Soviets were allies of China. Truman felt bombing China would start World War III. MacArthur continued to argue for his plan. He spoke to the press and to Republican leaders. Truman felt that he could no longer allow MacArthur's behavior. He fired MacArthur as commander. At first, the American public sided with MacArthur. Later, they came to agree with Truman's idea of a limited war. Meanwhile, a ceasefire went into effect in June of 1951. Both sides agreed on a demilitarized zone at the 38th parallel. An armistice was signed in July of 1953. This agreement was a stalemate. Korea was still divided between Communist North Korea and non Communist South Korea. Many people felt that American lives and money had been lost for little gain. As a result, the American people rejected the party in power, the Democrats. In the 1952 election, Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president. Americans also became even more worried about communist expansion abroad and communist spies at home.